Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, a podcast that features conversations with speedrunners, developers, content creators, and everything in between. This is episode 81, and for this one, we're going to be diving deep into one of the newest Zelda 1 ROM hacks, Ancient Dungeon, with the developer and creator, arnpoly. Thanks so much for joining. How you doing? Welcome.
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. This is a real treat.
I am so excited. We'll get to all of this because it's one of the most unique Zelda or any Zelda ROM hack I've ever played. So I can't wait to chat about it. But before, why don't we just get started and tell me a little bit about your history with gaming? What were some of the first games you played? How did you get started with this whole gaming thing?
So video gaming started for me with the NES, started very early. I was born in 83. And I think we got our first Nintendo. We got the NES as a family in I think Christmas of '88. So I would have just turned 5. I wish I remember the first time I played a Nintendo game or even an Atari game, because that might have been where I actually started, like just playing Atari at a babysitter's house or something. I don't really remember, but Super Mario Brothers was just absolutely captivating. I wanted to play that so bad, and I think my grandparents ended up buying us the Nintendo for Christmas as a family gift that year. And my mom and dad were real into it, and I was hooked. And I pretty much decided from then on, like, video games were just going to be everything I was interested in for the rest of my life. And that it stayed true through my teens and through my 20s. I've never stopped playing. I've never stopped playing the NES. I've never stopped playing modern games. So yeah,
we must have a similar story
because I'm hooked for life.
Right, hooked for life, exactly. And I'm 82, so it sounds like we have very similar stories. Do you remember when maybe the first time or the time you may have tried out a Zelda game? Because one of the things that I love about Ancient Dungeon, which we'll get to in a second, it feels like I was playing Zelda for the first time again, which is so an interesting and unique thing, and we'll talk about. But I'm like, do you remember what was some of your first experiences with Zelda?
I know we had it. I think I maybe got it for a birthday or a holiday or something. That gold box, that gold cartridge was, Nintendo knew what they were doing when they put that together. It catches your eye, and well, this has got to be something that's gold. It's got to be something special. So I wish I remember more about when I actually played it, but I know I really liked it. I had the fold out secrets guide and the map that shows you the first couple levels to kind of get you started. And I did the second quest like when I got a little older. Really fun. It's a timeless game. It really is.
That's a really good point. I've noticed, I was checking out your speedrun.com profile before. You have done some speedrunning, and I'm curious with your own, life, did you start, what came first? Did speedrunning or trying some speedruns out, or when did you, I guess, I also wondered about like when you started developing things or tried to pursue that side of things. So I'm curious, what came first? Was it development or speedrunning? Uh-oh. We have an internet break. Oh, there we go. We're back.
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, but I think I got your question. I took a programming class. It was some kind of thing through school. Like I took the SAT test when I was like in 4th grade or 5th grade. And like if you scored a certain level, like you could take a college class, and they had a college class in basic programming. And I took that on Saturdays when I was in 6th grade. And, programming and video games, video games are programmed, obviously, so they go just real hand in hand. So from kind of then on, I would tinker around in basic, and any way I would try to learn how to do anything was like, well, can we make a game out of it? Just real primitive, like just nonsense stuff. I tried to make an RPG in it, but it was like my influence was like Dragon Warrior 1, where it was just like very simple enemies, very simple combat. It was like black and white, just like vector graphic nonsense, because that was just what I could do at the time.
What were you programming on when you were in BASIC?
Yeah, I wish I remember some of that stuff. I tried to make some kind of like helicopter game that had like first person view and all kinds of craziness. And then I ended up like overwriting it somehow, and I never finished it because I like deleted a copy of it that I had by accident. And I'm like, okay, well, here's like 3 weeks of progress gone. So I just gave up on that idea.
When
I've
you
never. It's funny because Ancient Dungeons is the first time I've actually finished anything. I'm
oh,
more of just I've been a tinkerer for a long time
when you
on that
started
kind of
out
stuff.
tinkering on BASIC on a PC, was this in DOS or was this on a VIC 20 or a Commodore or something like that? What version? What flavor of BASIC were you using?
Yeah, it was QBasic
Okay.
on an old. It was on an old PC, like a 286. That was a hand me down from the instructor of the class. He had actually, I have this old computer I'm not using anymore. You can have it if you want it. And like, I don't have one. That's great. I would love to have one so I can actually do basic programming on it.
Absolutely. How cool. And then, so when did you get involved or give speedrunning a try? As I noticed, you do have a few submissions on your profile.
Yeah, speedrunning came later. I think the first kind of taste of it I got was with TASs.
Yeah.
I remember someone showed off the kind of the famous Morimoto
Yeah.
Super Mario Brothers 3 TAS,
Yes.
and it blew my mind. I remember sitting in college, like watching it on the LAN or whatever. Someone, hey, you gotta check this out, and I just sat there, like, just mouth just dropped, like, this is amazing. I didn't understand that it was done, by re-recording and that kind of stuff. I thought, like, man, people are really, really good at these games. And so it kind of broke off into, like watching stuff on Speed Demo Archive, that kind of stuff. But it was always just as a viewer. I never really tried to do it on my own. That came quite a bit later. Like, well, one of the AGDQs was real big. Like, that kind of came out of nowhere. I think it was probably the one 10 years ago. I think it might have been 2013. I was thinking about that earlier. So yeah, about 10 years of watching. But it didn't come till like the last just 2-3 years ago when I, finally got recording equipment to actually do it on the console, because doing it on emulator didn't seem to cut it. And I never had a computer strong enough to like actually capture
Right.
while playing at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So
was
it was
the
nothing I would take seriously until I actually had the proper tech.
Absolutely. And I know that can definitely be, we talk about this all the time, but nowadays cell phones are good enough where even if that's what you have, point that at the screen, there's just many different ways to do it, but it can be a challenge. Like, the technology can absolutely be, it's getting less and less, especially 10 years ago, it was even more challenging then.
Yeah, it's easy now for me.
Right.
It wasn't at the time.
OBS kind of changed a lot of different things for sure. What was one of the first games you attempted, and why did you choose that game?
I think the first game I actually ran with a timer was Tetris 2. I don't even know if I even submitted that to speedrun.com. I might have, or I might have thought about it, never did. Like, I had just set up streaming, and I like to beat NES games. That's kind of my thing. But I had extra time. I didn't want to start a new game. Like, well, I've been kind of noodling around with like 10 levels and Tetris 2. So that was, I think, where I first actually ran with a timer. But I think my actual first submission was before that. I think it might have been like AD&D Heroes of the Lance was a game that I beat, and I had just kind of stumbled upon the speedrun.com board, and there was no one had submitted a time for it. Like, okay, I'll throw my time up there. So I think
Free
it's
world
now
record. Just kidding.
Yeah, it was like 18 minutes, first place, and then someone finished it in 6 minutes, and someone else finished it in like 5:50, and so, like, okay, I guess there's ways to beat this a lot faster than what I did. So.
Right. How cool.
It wasn't speed wasn't the focus at all. It was just, I'm just trying to beat the game, and then oh, here's a board, I can upload it, and I can say I have a world record. That was kind of cool. A little party trick for a little while, just to say.
Absolutely. So then how the heck do you find yourself or your way into like Zelda 1 ROM hacking development? Like, what's the connection there? I'm curious how you got from one place to the other.
There really isn't. I guess I can say I started, I learned how to do assembly language for the NES. Actually started with the Super Nintendo, which uses the 65816 processor, which is based off of the NES's 6502. It's just got a few more features as far as the assembly language goes. I used it to make custom bosses in Super Mario World.
Oh,
That was
cool.
that was a little phase I went through for like 6 months, where I came up with all these ideas and I coded up like 3 of them, I think.
Wow.
Which was really it was really neat just to show off to friends. I uploaded them to a couple of them to YouTube. Um, it was just kind of a thing that I did there for a while, and then um, as far as the NES goes, I thought that was kind of a more attractive platform to try to develop for, as far as like an actual game. And I have noodled around with homebrew kind of off and on for the last however many, 8 or 9 years probably, but you know, I get really excited about it and I'll dive into it for maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and I get something kind of started, and then when I'm ready to take it to the next level, I'm like, okay, well, I've kind of hit my limit of kind of really what I'm interested in. So I have several projects that have never really gotten off the ground, just kind of abandoned. I still have them. I mean, I could still pick them back up someday, but they're nothing super impressive.
Every developer that's been on this podcast has abandoned projects like that. I think that just comes with the territory. To be perfectly honest with you, I've only done a very little bit of coding in my life, but I do have some friends and others who have worked in assembly, and it's always been kind of intimidating to me, to be honest with you. And I'm curious how you went about learning the language, and then also what kind of what challenges are faced when, like, let's start with, Mario World custom bosses. Like, how do you learn how to do something like that?
Um, Thankfully, there's a lot of people smarter than me that came up with ways to do the hacking. So I remember with the Mario bosses, you have to make custom objects. Like Goombas are an object, or coins can be the coins that bounce along the ground. Those are an object. They have a tool where you have to create the graphics for them. You have to create the code to run them, to do their stuff. But then once you write that code, they have tools to put it in the right spot in the game for you so it will actually work. So I didn't have to do any of that kind of, um, that mind level thinking. And then they also have RAM maps and ROM maps, which are very useful, in a game that's already pre-compiled like that.
Right.
Like this piece of memory here, like this is your score, these are your lives, this is the position of your character on the screen. Okay, well now I can influence that and I can make my character walk around and do whatever. So you kind of you take what you need for whatever piece of functionality you're trying to make, and you just kind of grab a little bit here, grab a little bit there, and you put it together and you just kind of bang around on it till you get it to work. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. I was successful enough to get a few of them done, just with just lots of hours over it's like 2 or 3 months, 4 months.
How cool.
Which is a hobby thing.
Absolutely. And what a fun way to do it with games that it's obvious you've enjoyed the retro, we call it retro now, but enjoying those libraries. Start with a game you like. That same thing goes for speedrunning. I always talk about the first game I ever speedrun was Super Mario Brothers 3, and it's like, always pick something you like doing because you're going to be spending some time with it. It sounds like the similar when trying to hack a ROM or trying to create some custom code. It's pretty cool. Let's
I love Mario, so it made sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Let's, for those that haven't yet seen this, and I know it's out there a lot now, but what exactly is The Legend of Zelda Ancient Dungeon? Tell us a little bit about it, and then we'll talk about the development of it.
Sure. So the elevator pitch for The Legend of the Ancient Dungeon is it is a ROM hack of Legend of Zelda 1 that treats the game like a roguelike. So off the top, there's no overworld, there's no exploration, there's no wandering around, there's no going in and out of caves, and there's none of that stuff. You start the game, you get dropped directly into the dungeon, the front door of the dungeon. You walk in, the door closes behind you, and they'll have at the top, it'll say room 0. You find an open door, move to the next room. The room layouts and the enemies inside the rooms are at runtime randomly generated and stuck into the room. All the doors close behind you. You kill all the enemies, and the doors open. Now you can pick any door you want. You can backtrack the way you came. Doesn't matter. the next room you move to, it'll pick a brand new room layout, new set of enemies. And then you just kind of repeat that over and over and over again. Now there's bosses inside, there are upgrades inside. Most of the Zelda 1 objects you find that makes sense to be in the dungeon are in the dungeon. Like the swords, the upgraded swords are in there. The rings that give you better defense are in there. Like the raft that takes you to spots on the overworld is not in there because it doesn't make sense for it to be in there. Also, like every enemy I could think of that made sense to include in the game has somehow made its way into the dungeon. All the bosses are in there too,
including overworld enemies,
kind of sprinkled throughout as you go. So it's a roguelike because it changes as you go. You have a sense of progression because you can power up and get stronger. The enemies, as you get deeper, the enemy types get stronger, the bosses get stronger, and then there's also permadeath. There's no save files, there's no reloading, there's none of that stuff. If you die, it's game over. You start back over at room 0.
There are so many great things about the game. I guess let's first start with, how did you get this idea? What was the thing that led you to try to develop this yourself?
So I really like roguelikes in general. I'm trying to think of even some that I've played. A lot of people have said like, well, this is like the Binding of Isaac. Yes. In NES form. I'm like, well, okay, I know that's like a Zelda. It's Binding of Isaac. I've played it like maybe 30 minutes. It's not really. It's sort of an inspiration, but not really.
Right.
You know, I mean, that game is, I guess, at its core, Zelda 1. You know, as a
most
roguelike.
Definitely, yeah.
So you'd think that'd be where it come from, but it really didn't. But I like that kind of the game. I like the procedurally generated content. And I like the NES as a platform, and I feel like that's kind of a not as explored space. You know, the homebrew scene in NES is pretty big. As it's niche, but as far as niches go, I think it's pretty big. There's a lot of it with NES Maker, and right. People have been coding stuff for years and years and years. So there's tons of games out there, but I feel like there's room for like procedurally generated stuff on the NES. But there's not a lot of it currently. A homebrew that I played, that I bought, it's called Gold Guardian Gun Girl. It's a pretty neat game. It's kind of like a dungeon crawler. You get dropped in a room, and you go from room to room as you can find them, and there's enemies inside, and you're this little mech that just shoots streams of bullets, and you can rotate around to aim or whatever. And each of these it's like a floor-based system, and each floor has, so many rooms. You just going from room to room trying to find the exit, and then powering up on the enemies that you kill as you go. But it's every time you play it, the enemies that you encounter, there's only a few enemy types, but trying to find the exit, that's different every time. The path that you would take through, the doors you would take is different every time. So that was kind of an inspiration, like, okay, well, this can be done, and it's not a huge game. I think it's, one of the smaller NES games as far as size goes. It doesn't have one of the big mapper chips where it can, expand the ROM to a huge size to include a bunch of levels and stuff. If you're making your own levels, you don't need as much.
Right.
So that was an inspiration. It more just kind of came to me at some point that, Zelda, I like fighting in the Zelda game. Yes. I like the dungeons. Why can't you just stay in the dungeon? So you want to get into the development of it a little bit. When I first started looking at it, one of the first things I thought of was, okay, can we get, when you move from room to room, the game already has stored in its data somewhere. Okay, when you're in this room and you move to the screen to the right, this is the room that it gives you. Well, can I override that somehow?
Yeah.
Can I make it point to something else? And I tinkered around with it for maybe an hour, and I eventually got to the point where I made a Game Genie code, which is a nice little way of just making a very small tweak to the game code. And I was able to make a code to where whenever you walked from room to room, it would just be the same room every time. So like the first room I can think of is just the room that has just complete wide open space, no blocks in it whatsoever. You would walk back and forth, and it would just, that's room 0. It would just put room 0 every time. I could tweak the code and have it do room 1. Walk back and walk into the other room. Okay, now it's room 1. I walk back to where I came. Oh, now it's room 1. This big block is in the middle. So that was kind of where it started. Can I get this to work? Can I get it to work where it's not going to take me a few weeks to figure it out? I figured it out in an evening. Like, okay, well, now can we put enemies in this thing? And it just kind of snowballed from there.
So that was going to be one of my first questions. Most of us in the speedrunning community are pretty familiar with randomizers and how that seeding works. And so my understanding is we download a set of instructions that's determined for the entire game. And I'm curious, so when you start up a new game on Ancient Dungeon, is the seed set, or is literally the room making random decisions from room to room? I'm curious how that works.
Yeah, it's a very good question, because that's the one that people ask about quite a bit. So this might get a little technical. I hope that's okay.
No, please, absolutely.
So Zelda 1 has several spots in RAM that it uses to generate its random values. So every frame, it'll just constantly like tweak these values, and it does it fast enough that it's essentially randomized. The game does this for like moving enemies around, or positioning Zora like on a screen with the water where he pops up out of the water. It uses those random values to try to find a water place to put him. Those kinds of things. Also for like when you defeat an enemy, like there's a roll that determines if that enemy drops an item or not. Now, like what actually item it drops is predetermined, but like the chance of it dropping an item is randomized, and it's determined. When that enemy is defeated, it pulls one of those values to determine, was the enemy going to drop something or not. Yeah. So you can use those values for anything. So whenever you do a room transition, it reads those values and it uses those values to generate the room and the enemies. So it's all done at runtime. There's no capability already built into the game to do like where you could input a seed,
right?
Where you could have a set, the rooms be the same every time. They're still randomized, but if you know how randomizers work, you put in a seed, right. Everyone puts in the same seed, they get the exact same layout of the game, even though the game is itself randomized. So you could sort of do that, but you'd have to like do the exact same movements as another person, which is not really. Or if another thing this game does is it sets some stuff up at the very beginning. So some of that is also reads those same values. So if 2 people were to start the game at the same time and press the start button on the exact same frame, you would get some of those things at the very beginning of the game the same. But it's meant to be every time you start it, it's different. So,
and I still have not had yet every run I've done of the game at this point has felt brand new, to say the least. The thing that struck me almost immediately was I'm not a speedrunner of Zelda 1, so the difficulty curve seems so very fair and seems so well balanced. And I'm curious how you went about finding that right balance and how long that actually took to get there. Because I still now I haven't gotten to 255 yet, but the balance just still seems the increasing in difficulty is really well done.
Yeah, that was. For some reason, I have kind of a sense. It's kind of hard to explain, but I sort of had an idea about how it would work. Even at a code level, before I even really tried to tackle it, I made like a design document after I kind of started getting into the code. Like, okay, I think this is actually possible. Like, what do I actually want to do? And so I scoped out. I want these items in the game. I want these enemies in the game. I ranked them. So this is kind of how I did. We'll just take the enemies, for example. So I took every enemy in the game, because there's a table out there. Some smart people, some smart people online have figured out, okay, here's a table of all the enemy IDs. So I could go, that's how you would inject an enemy into the game. You You provide the enemy ID to get it in the level. So I had a list of enemies, and it's funny when I compiled the list together and I ranked them. Well, how many do I have? Because trying to randomly select from an arbitrary number of enemies, that it presents its own challenge.
No kidding.
Well, it came out to like 31 or something. And when you're doing programming, especially on like an old 8-bit computer like the NES is, you want a power of 2. Well, 32 is just right there. So I actually doubled up one of the enemies to make 32. Then as I got into it, I actually added more, but I wanted 32 as the number because that's a real friendly number. The actual enemy table is 256 in size. That's the same number of rooms in the game too. That's the 2 to the 8. It's the biggest value you can put in an 8-bit value, which conveniently works really well for selection. So each of those enemies is in that table 8 times. And I actually wrote a little program in JavaScript of all things to kind of shuffle those to where the easier enemies on the list tend to fall earlier in the game, and the harder enemies tend to fall later in the game. And then based on what room you're in out of the 255, it picks a random enemy, but from a certain slice of the table. So as you get farther in the game, the slice that you're picking from moves deeper and deeper and deeper into the enemy table, so that it's picking up harder enemies. Blue Rizrobe I have at the very end of the list because that's the hardest regular enemy you find in the game. And you don't tend to find those until maybe right the middle of the game. But it's the way that I have the list structured, it's balanced to be really rare at the beginning of the game, or in the middle of the game, rather. And then when you get to the end, the likelihood of it appearing gets higher and higher and higher because of not just drawing from a slice of 32. I'm drawing from a bigger slice of 256 with that enemy in there 8 times. And I think that's what gives it a better balance. I do the same thing with the dungeon rooms. There's also, I think I ended up with 32 of those as well. So that was super convenient. So I did the exact same thing with the rooms. I ranked them from easiest and did the exact same method.
Are bosses considered one of the enemies? I'm not quite sure how Zelda treats that. So are bosses on a different table, or are they how does that exactly work?
Yeah, bosses. So the items that you get are on their own table. Okay. That came out to 16, another power of 2. How perfect.
Great numbers.
The bosses came out to 16. I'm not joking. It's poetic how it managed to work out so beautifully. So yeah, the bosses are in their own table. The items are in their own table. When you start the game, they get shuffled. They get shuffled in a different way because I want the items you get to be like really shuffled to where you can get, you could get the white sword. The white sword is a very good item to have. It's double attack power. You could get that as your very first drop. You could even get it in the very first room. It's rare, but you could do that. But I wanted the bosses to be more progressive. So they're shuffled a little bit, but in general, the easier bosses are in the beginning of the game and the harder bosses are at the end of the game. They just get sprinkled throughout. They're not on any set schedule. That's randomized too. I think it's more fun than, if you have 16 bosses, you could do one every 16 rooms, but I think it's more fun if it's a little more flexible. So I made a little bit of wiggle room.
I appreciated that too, because it felt, once again, like no run was the same because I was getting randomized when I was actually hitting the boss fights and everything. You mentioned that you did a design document as you were going along. So if you don't mind, take us through a little bit. What was the actual phases you went through? Where did you start? What was next? How did you have to divvy this up as somebody who's, doing this for fun and also as a family and a day job and I'm sure all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. The funny thing is that the development of this became like its own reward. It was really fun. And it ended up, I just got so captivated by the idea of actually putting this together because this is really a kind of game that, I was mentioning earlier, this is really the kind of game I wanted to have on the NES that we really don't have.
Right.
It's hard enough to create one from scratch. It's really hard to create. You create your own assets, your graphics, your music. I'm not a music person. I can't do music. I could bleep and bloop my way through something, but no one's going to want to listen to that. So, I kind of lost track of what I was
No.
saying.
So, where did you start? What was like the first thing you tackled? And then you mentioned you did this obviously in your free time. So what, if you don't mind
Yeah.
taking us through, where do you start and what comes next?
Yeah. So this first started with, can I decide what rooms you get? That was the first thing because I wanted to randomize that. Um, yeah, designing the enemy tables, that was something I did really early. Um, maybe too early because if I wouldn't have actually figured it out, I would have been a lot of wasted time. That part was not so hard to do. That's more design stuff than like technical figuring out stuff. But that was one of the earlier things I did. The shuffling at the start of the items and the bosses, that was something I did really early. Um, those things are just the hardest thing about making a ROM. I'm going to divert a little bit from what you're
Please.
asking.
Yeah.
I think it's just on the right track. So the hardest thing about making a ROM hack is you have to find ways to put your code in the game, but you don't recompile. Like if you're making a game in another language or if you're making your own game, you just recompile it and it stacks everything together and compiles it in the ROM file. Well, you don't have that luxury in a ROM hack. Wherever the data is, wherever the existing code is, you can't really move it. Because if you move it, you got to move a bunch of other stuff and it just gets super messy and the game probably won't run. So what you end up having to do is you have to find, okay, are there spaces in this ROM file that don't have anything in them? Are there blank spaces? Is there memory values that aren't being used that I can use? So that was one of the first exploration things I did was um, digging through the ROM, looking at the RAM. Since Zelda has a save battery, that battery backup is just extra RAM. So there's an extra chip on the game that has, for all your save files. It needs a big chunk of memory for that. So there's a lot to pull from. And once you start getting into it a while, you can find out, okay, I don't need save files in this ROM hack. So the area of memory where it saves your save files, you can use that for something else. I have used where the overworld data is stored. There's no overworld in this game. I don't need to save that map, so I can overwrite that with my own stuff. It turns out the Zelda 1 ROM has a lot of unused space. I don't know if that's because they had extra space, because remember, it started out on the Famicom Disk System in Japan,
Yeah.
which has its own different format and everything. In fact, one of the interesting things that Zelda 1 does from a technical level is it takes a chunk of code and copies it into that RAM memory, because you can run code from there too. So a lot of the common code I don't even know what stuff is in that code, but I think like the code that converts the rupee value to the actual text that you see on the screen, like, if you have 136 rupees, it doesn't store that as 1, a 3, and a 6. It has to convert that to the display. I think that code is in that batch of code. I don't know. It's just, I don't know why they made the decisions that they did, but it lends itself to some interesting problems.
It's interesting that you mentioned that the original game doesn't max out the capacity of the cart, because when I first played the game as a kid, and even today, I just recently played through the game about a year ago, it still feels pretty massive for an NES game. So that's, especially with all the dungeons and everything, that's quite surprising to hear.
Yeah, the ROM is broken up into like 8 ROM banks.
Wow.
I think it's 128K ROM broken up into 16K slices. So each of those 16K slices uses like 14 or 15K. So there's a little chunk at the end. Sometimes it's sizable enough where you can jam a whole bunch of stuff in. One of the data banks is where like the magic happens. That has gotten pretty full. So I'm having to really like do some magic to like make more space in that area so I can add more stuff. That ended up being a challenge, like maybe 75% of the way before the first release. Oh, I'm actually running out of space here. And the way that it works, it's hard to put some of that information, like, say, another data bank, because of the way you have to swap those banks. I know this is getting technical
No,
again,
I love
but
it. This is great. Thank you.
the NES can only see 2 of those banks at a time. One of those banks is fixed. It's that does, the stuff that runs every single frame. Stuff that handles like the screen splitting when it scrolls and all that stuff, all the walking around and the enemies moving around, all that stuff is in like the common. It's fixed at the bottom, and then there's another one at the above it that you can swap in and out. And if I have code, that bottom bank is like almost completely full. That's the only one that's almost completely entirely full, which makes sense if they had to put extra code in the expanded RAM. If they had to put extra code in there, well, they probably ran out of space on that lower data bank. But if you need to run, if you're like in bank, they're numbered 0 through 7. 7's the fixed one at the end. So most of my code runs in bank 5. If I need to run code out of bank 2 from bank 5, it's workable, but it's kind of a problem. So I've avoided that pretty much every avenue I could. So bank 5 is the one that's becoming kind of an issue, because that's where the magic happens as far as the room to room. But that's also the bank that has the overworld data in it. So I've overwritten a lot of that. So that helped. That was kind of a convenient thing. It's all of this like memory management stuff that, like, when you're making a homebrew game or making a game on a modern platform, you don't have to care about at all. This is not necessary, because it will fix itself whenever you do a build, and it doesn't work that way in romhack.
Thank you for explaining this whole process. It's absolutely fascinating. So was there at any point, you've mentioned some of the challenges and everything like that, was there anything that actually just completely broke the game? Like when you pulled out the overworld or something like that, was there any time where the game stopped working or something didn't quite work the way you wanted it to?
I did have that happen when I mentioned earlier, when I was running out of space. That was when I had made a change, and then I ran my code, and the title screen came up okay. Then you hit start to jump right into the game, and black screen.
Ooh.
And I'm like, oh no, what did I do? How do I go back?
Yeah.
And you back out some stuff. Okay, well, now it's working. Well, like, did I do something weird to like break the game in an interesting way? And it turned out I was just overflowing the space that I needed. I guess at the end of each bank, there's like some common code that isn't all of the banks, and I was overwriting that. And it turns out that gets used at some point in the transition between the title screen and when the game starts. And so it was trying to write code that is no longer there because I put something else there, and it didn't jive. It bombed out. I also had a really weird bug when I was trying to test this outside of the emulator. I don't have an EverDrive or anything like that to test with. I do have one of the analog NT minis, and it has, if you have the jailbreak installed on it, you can run ROMs on it, kind of like an EverDrive.
Right.
And so that was really fun for me to put that on and play it on the TV. That was really fun. But it didn't work for a long time. And I'm trying to rack my brain to even remember what it was. It had something to do with like the way, like, the empty RAM at the start of the game is set up. Like, if you write if something was a 0 and running on the TV on the analog, it was set as something else, and that broke it. And it took me a long time to figure out what that was. Then it fixed it. Then it came back. I'm like, no, I fixed this already. It was just a weird thing. I was afraid that it ran on emulator fine, but that's no good if you can't play it on everything. And I didn't do any weird stuff I didn't expand the ROM or anything to make it. I mean, it functionally, it's like the same ROM size and format and everything as the original game, but there's no reason why it wouldn't work.
I was going to
oddball challenge.
I was going to ask what your setup was, but I'm glad you described it to me, because my NES is not working right now, so I had to. I played it on a Mister, but then I've been playing now portably on the analog pocket. Speaking of the
Yeah,
analog, I just, yeah,
works
there
really
you
good
go.
here, doesn't it?
But this is like the perfect game when you're sitting on the couch. Just you could load up, you could go through, get a couple runs in. So interesting. So because I was watching Lack Attack's playthroughs, he's been speedrunning it now, and I was, it works great with the EverDrive setup and everything. So that makes sense that because you're not using any additional chips or anything like that. It's something that should run on native hardware and everything like that. So
Yeah, I was really fortunate that it did. I had a few people test it before I released it,
cool.
just to make sure. I was tested on EverDrive working. It tested everywhere except on my my NT Mini. That was the last thing I got working. And eventually figured out what it was, because that was a deal breaker for me. I needed to have it run on something that I could play.
Oh yeah.
It's a little more fun. It's a little more fun to play on the TV for me right now than the Pocket. Even though the Pocket's a great way to play it.
Totally agree. It definitely benefits from having the bigger screen. I mean, especially because 8-bit, my memories, the whole nostalgia thing for me is playing, a Nintendo on a on an actual TV, maybe even a CRT. So, see it there. We talked a little bit about it, but as far as I could tell, now I haven't gotten through all the rooms, but as far as I could tell, these are all original assets. Did you have to create any additional sprite work, music, sound effects, anything like that? Or is this all vanilla assets?
I added one thing, and it's very minor. You probably wouldn't notice it if I didn't tell you. The romhack has an in-game timer, and whenever you beat the game or when you die, it'll put the time on the screen. The colon character for the separating the time, that wasn't an original character, so I added that in. That's the only thing I changed.
I've heard from other developers that actually text actually takes up a fair amount of memory on 8-bit games. Is that accurate? Like, did that take, how much space did, I'm curious, like a colon take up?
Yeah, no, it's a colon is just one tile.
Okay.
The actual character data that the game uses. Actually, this is actually something I want to talk about on a different tangent.
Yeah, please.
I think one of the questions we had talked about before was like one of the hardest challenges that I had in making this. We'll jump right into that.
Do it.
The one of the coolest features about Ancient Dungeon is that it has all of the enemies in it. There's just a few that aren't in there, but for the most part, all the enemies are in there. When you play Zelda normally, you only have a certain group of enemies that can play with each other at one time. So this applies to the overworld. There's a set of enemies that you see on the overworld, like the Octoroks, the Levers, the Lynels up in Death Mountain, the Peahats. All of those enemy graphics are stored together in the same group. When you go into the dungeon, it swaps those enemy graphics out for different enemies. So like when you go into Dungeon 1, you have the Keese, you have the Stalfos, you have the Gels, you have the Gorias, you have Aquamenus, the boss. So all of those graphics get swapped whenever you go into the dungeon. Those graphics the old ones for the overworld get swapped out, the new ones get swapped in. The way that Zelda 1 handles its graphics, a lot of NES games have their graphics stored on ROM chips. They're read-only. Once the game reads them, that's what you have. Some of the advanced mapper chips have bank swapping. Zelda 1 has bank swapping for its program code. A lot of mappers will have bank swapping for their character code so that you can swap graphics in and out on the fly as you go. Zelda doesn't have ROM graphics, it has a RAM chip for graphics. So what the game has to do is when it starts up, it has to read graphics out of the same data memory where like the program code is. So it will read that into the character memory of the PPU, the picture processing unit of the NES. What that means is that you can rewrite those graphics on the fly. And so what I wanted to do, and eventually worked, whenever you walk into the room in the dungeon, since you're not going inside and out of the overworld, it's not doing that swap. So I had to code in my own graphics swap, and it's very, very fine-tuned as to how it actually works. Um, on a room-to-room level, it will, you'll have what enemies are in the next room. Every time you transition through the door, it will swap the new graphics for those enemies in at runtime. I ended up having to write a little scheduler kind of thing because actually changing that memory at runtime, you have a very small slice of time every frame to make those changes without getting like actual like graphical hiccups on the screen, like the screen jumping around
Yeah.
or graphics getting garbled up or whatever. So you have a very short amount of time every frame to make those changes. So I wrote like a little scheduler kind of program. Well, it's not really a separate program, it's just a method in the game where each enemy they'll have listed, like we'll say an Octorok, for example, is a pretty good one. Well, maybe we'll go with a simpler example. Like the little gel drops, they only take 2 tiles of graphical data. So they're not too complex. I think the way the math worked out, I did a lot of research into this, trying to figure out exactly how much time I had, and then trying to translate to how many tiles can I write in between. I think I settled somewhere around 10 or 12 tiles. I think I end up setting it to actually 8. It does 8. So that gel hat takes up 2 tiles. So I can write that in 1 frame. A bigger enemy like Agoria, I think has like 4 frames of animation, and it's 4 tiles each of those frames, so it's got 16 tiles. So I do 8 of them on the 1 frame, and then I have the other 8 of them on the next frame. So I have this little data structure in there that says on this frame, I load these graphics from this location, this many tiles, put it here. And I do that same thing for every enemy that you would encounter in that room. The bosses are the same way. The bosses take up their own slice of graphics. They take up quite a bit more graphics than the regular enemies, so you have to slice those up into equal pieces. The other thing I had to contend with was the when you move through the door and the screen scrolls, that takes up that's very well tuned code for it to handle the scrolling. And as you're scrolling, you're writing new room data. You're drawing room data as you scroll. So I can't do any extra. I can't add my own graphics at that time because it's completely taxed as far as the time it's taking. It's very well tuned to not do hiccups. It turns out this is one of those beautiful things. Whenever the scrolling stops, Link has a little animation of him walking through the door that's done automatically every time you walk through a room. There's no graphical updates that are happening during that time. It's like a 14 or 15 frame window, something like that, where it's not doing any graphics. And I jam all of my updates in at that time on every single room transition. And there's a little chunk of graphical data at the end of the sprite data where all those enemies fit, and it's done dynamically at runtime. It was a beautiful thing when I actually got it to work for the first time, and I saw Octorok graphics. I saw Octorok walking around. I gasped. Like it shocked me that it actually worked. It was so cool. One of my favorite moments of dev was getting that was the biggest hurdle.
What a victory! It's funny.
I want to say too. Sorry to cut you off there. I want to say too. The other thing that I did was the code that actually writes those graphics. I had to write that scheduler. The the code is really weird. So I'm actually writing. I have a piece of code in there that writes assembly code at runtime into RAM that is actually handling the loading of the data. Like I sat down and figured, okay, what's the most efficient way to actually load the data while you're running? And we're talking like individual instructions and how many like processor cycles they run. I want to minimize this as small as I can get it, as compact as I can get it, to jam as much data as I can at one go. So I have code in there that writes code every room transition, or every frame of those graphical updates. So yeah, writing code that generates code was a really interesting challenge. I think all of that put together was why it was so shocking that it actually worked. That I had enough of an understanding of how you can actually do this on the Nintendo, and then to just jam it into an existing game that didn't already have this functionality was really cool. I hope that made sense.
It absolutely did. No, this is what I wanted to mention is as you're mentioning that, I have my playthrough up on my screen that I did on stream, and I'm noticing now that I'm noticing that delay that happens before the screen transition, and I never even thought. It never occurred to me that that would actually be useful. And then I'm also thinking back to my original Zelda 1 playthrough of the vanilla game where, okay, there's, when you walk into a dungeon, there's this loading screen. That's a perfect time to, activate or whatever. I'm sorry, execute whatever code you wanted to. And what a great way to use that. But also that could be helpful for other developers who want to, perhaps they're diving into Zelda and the fact that you found this stuff and were able to use it that way, that's absolutely fascinating and awesome at the same time, because the experience from the endpoint, my user experience, didn't even notice. Like, it's perfectly seamless. It's really well done.
Yeah, there's no hiccups. There's no stuttering.
No.
That walking through the door sequence is in vanilla. It's in the vanilla game. Right. And it actually works into the design of the game, since you walk through the doors close behind you. There's extra frames involved because he has to walk a little farther. He has to walk completely into the room before the door closes. So there's extra time there that you wouldn't normally have. If the door is open, you don't have as much time to write those graphics. The only time I leave the door open is when you go into a shop room. But that's a very small graphical update. That was no problem to deal with that.
To be honest, I'm even a little bit surprised that you said that when you started talking about how all of this stuff is happening during transition, because as far as I could tell, it looked exactly like vanilla screen transitioning in a dungeon. So
if you pull up the game in an emulator where you can watch the graphics, you can watch it you watch it change in real time, which is really cool.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's absolutely fascinating. And so all that really does go into making the experience just perfectly seamless. And I assume that's what you were going for the end user. Yeah. So was it, you mentioned that the 256 rooms, and is that a limitation of the RAM, or is that what you had envisioned? Like, how did that come to be that was the number?
When you're reading on the NES, when you're reading data out of a table, you can use these index. This is really into assembly language, but you have an index register that you can use as your offset into the table. The best way to visualize this is if you think about the Zelda 1 dungeon maps. So I don't know if you know this or not, but the levels 1 through 6 in the first quest, actually in both quests of Zelda, dungeons 1 through 6, you can put them together. The shapes themselves are different, but they fit together like a puzzle in a 16 room by 8 room rectangle.
How have I not known this?
They fit perfect. There's a few gaps
where
there's unused rooms. But yeah, they fit. Yeah.
Wow.
So each of those room numbers has an ID number from 0 through 7F in the assembly hex code, which is 127. So there's 128 rooms. Then 7 through 9 take up the other 128. So it actually makes, if you put all of it together, it makes a square. 256 is, the biggest number you can get. 0 through 255 is the range you get out of an 8-bit value. So that's just how the NES uses its accumulator, its index registers, and the actual coding. It's just that size. Now you can pare it down to a power of 2 really easily, but I think actually expanding it and making it bigger, and then kind of blending it in that, because each enemy appears 8 times in that list, but it's spread out. And it just kind of works if you're like I mentioned before, if you're looking at a certain slice of that, as you get farther in the game, it looks into a deeper chunk of that table. And since you've got your earlier enemies bunched up more at the beginning of that table, and then you've got your harder enemies bunched at the end of the table, it's its own natural difficulty curve that's just already there.
When you were originally tackling this, was there plans for a second quest? Like, how do you go about considering some of those things? And this probably gets into spoiler territory, but how does that even come to be a thing? And the only reason I know about it is because I watched Lack stream. So I was like, how does that even happen?
I played through the game, or I'd started to play through the game, and I kind of had the idea that I wanted like a hard mode. Originally I had thought about borrowing the game's save menu, because I just blow right past it in the code. I don't use the save menu for anything because there's no save files in this game. So it just takes you straight from title screen to game. I thought about like redrawing that menu and having like a easy hard mode, different kind of toggles in there. That would be all custom code from scratch, basically. I thought it was easier just to not deal with that. And then just kind of somewhere like in the middle of development, like, oh, this game has a second quest. Why don't I just make a second quest? It fits perfectly with what is already here. So then I thought about, okay, well, how can I make a second quest interesting? So what second quest actually is more or less just like balancing tweaks. It's a number of things. I think I almost like keeping it a surprise. I think most things are pretty obvious. Like first thing, the second quest has stronger enemy types in it. So the Stalfos, the skeletons, they will throw the sword at you at random in the second quest. The snakes, the ropes, they have like a whole lot more HP in the second quest. That's just something that vanilla has, so that made sense. The red bubbles that take your sword away, that's a second quest thing. So okay, well, I swap the bubbles out for the red bubbles in the second quest, and then I have custom code in there to always pair it with at least one blue bubble. So you can get multiple red bubbles, but there's always one blue that gives you your sword back. So you don't have to, if you can't lose it in a room and then not be able to get it back, except for one room where sometimes that blue bubble can get trapped and you can't get to it. That may be a thing that might get fixed in the future. Just maybe. So that's one thing.
Especially for I think of the speedrunning community quite a bit. I know that the inclusion of something like this, a hard mode or a second quest, is absolutely appreciated, because I mean, I love playing hacks nowadays too, just because it makes the original game feel brand new all over again. So including something like that is a great addition. How long this is a very thoughtful process, and there's so many different iterations and things you've considered and all this custom code you've done. How the hell long did this take to create and develop?
So unfortunately, I didn't document like when I started working on it, and I'm usually pretty good at that in my abandoned projects. I'll put I started writing this design document. I put the date on the top of it, and I just did not do it. I think I probably started messing around with it like at the very end of August, beginning of September. I don't have a lot of free time, but it pretty much all went to this. Like I said, I got completely hooked once I actually got into it, and like, okay, I can make this work. And then I made a little tiny framework for actually, adding new pieces to the code, and so that part was a little less painful. And you start piecing things together. It was just like it's like putting a puzzle together. Was really what it came down to. And I like puzzle games, so it just kind of it's its own programming puzzle to make it work. So I got really addicted to it and worked on it about as much as I possibly could. I got it done like sometime like around Thanksgiving. I sat on it for a little while. And then like a week before it came out, I'm like, oh, I have a bunch of other things I might like to tweak into this. Like one of those things is when you get a special item, Link will hold it up over his head,
right?
The little animation.
Yes.
That wasn't originally in there.
Oh,
that was one of the last things I added. The Armos enemies, the statues that you can wake up on the overworld, Those didn't work in the dungeon at all, just dropping them in there directly. And a lot of it had to do with how you activate them in the regular game. You have to wake them from a statue, and it has code in there to take that statue away and put a blank space in its place, and then replace it with the enemy object that walks around. So that code had to be completely gutted to get it to work in the dungeon. And then that had some other issues because it dies in a different way that the other enemies do.
Of course.
And that had some problems with like the way the item drops work, so I had to hack around that. It was a lot of last minute things, but I had in mind, my birthday was on the 9th of December, and I had in mind I wanted to try to get this out on my birthday. It was a Friday. Seemed like a pretty good day, so that was kind of what I was shooting for. And all that little tiny list of like extra polish that I wanted to do to it kind of came together like that first week of December. So it was just right down to the wire. And there was no pressure to release it on any given time. It was just kind of my own thing. The other thing I liked is that I told very few people about this before I actually released it. I really like the idea of like, what Nintendo does nowadays on their Nintendo, they'll have a Nintendo Direct and here's this game that you've never seen before and it's out today and you can go get it. And that's just so cool when that happens. So I really liked the idea of just dropping it out of nowhere.
Okay. First of all, I'm absolutely floored that this took you 3 months, basically, maybe a little bit less. I mean, that's just mind boggling, but I guess when you fall into something you enjoy doing, you just want to keep doing it.
It was a lot of, I give my wife a lot of credit for putting up with me staying up a lot of late nights.
Absolutely.
It's funny. I told her that I was working on this.
Yeah.
And then I released it and she's like, you did what? She had like, I told you I was making this, didn't I?
It's a real thing. Well, it honestly felt the release within like the first couple of weeks. Basically, many of the Zelda speedrunners that I enjoy watching their streams were playing it. I saw it on Cantaloupe. I saw it on all these different streams. Tell me, from your perspective, what was the reception like, and how does that make you feel after putting so much effort into the game?
The release of this just absolutely blew me away. I could not have expected everything that happened. I have a full list of stuff that's just crazy to me that happened. The release itself kind of botched, kind of. I wanted to submit it to romhacking.net, and I had it set up like, okay, I have the submission form, I have everything, I have the screenshots up, I have everything ready to go. And I hit go like at midnight on the 9th. Well, it turns out they have a submission queue process where they like 24 to 48 hours before it can actually get approved. So like, okay, well, maybe it'll get approved during the day. Well, it didn't happen. It got approved like very early in the morning on Saturday, the 10th. I already went to bed. When I woke up in the morning, I saw my Twitter had a little bit more activity than normal. One of my mutuals on there found the game, saw it posted. He's like, "Hey, are you the same arnpoly that made this ROM hack? Like, this is really cool." I'm like, "Oh, cool! This came out without me knowing. This is great." Well, let me get on Twitter at my own. Hey, I'm introducing this new game, and I mean, I don't want to say it went viral because I don't think that's really, but it's like far and away my biggest tweet of all time. Something like 300 retweets, like 800 likes.
Yeah,
like pretty good. Got pretty good reach that first week. My phone was blowing up that whole first week. The first day was crazy. So at work, the 9th was ended up being my last day of work for the year. So I jumped straight into vacation, having like JSR stream Ancient Dungeon like that afternoon. And that was real fun to watch. Later that evening, Lack Attack streamed it. And someone said, "Hey, Lack Attack is streaming your game." Oh, I'm going to go and check it out. Oh, there's 500 people in his stream. Watch it. This is crazy. I think the first 24 hours, they got to 1,000 downloads. That Sunday, that next day after, Mike Matei played it on stream and got in contact with me saying he enjoyed it. I saw Mitch Flower Power playing it kind of at random. Like all these like big stream, all the Zelda 1 folks, all of them basically have played it at some point. I've watched so many. Like got a hold on YouTube in a few places as well. Even this morning, I watched Gray Skull playing it this morning, and he beat it for the first time and had a blast. So there's still some legs to it, even like it's been about a month, almost a month now since it's been out. We reached 4,000 downloads the other day. 4,000! Like, are you kidding me? Like, this is just, it blows my mind because this is just like a fun little thing that I did because I like roguelike type games and thought like, I can make Zelda fit into this. And it's a game that I wanted to play on my NES. So it was just, a fun little side project that I did like sort of in secret for a few months. It just became like this passion of mine, a just completely addicting thing. And then for it to just have really gotten legs like it did, like I never asked or expected for this, but I'm enjoying it. Even being here on Sequence Break with you, like this is like I've never been on a podcast before. I don't know if you can tell. This is my first time being on any podcast.
You're doing great.
Like what a treat. I don't know. This is hard to. I know I've already put it into words, but it's almost hard to put into it's hard to put into better words. Just how cool this whole thing has been. Plus, I have fun playing it. Like it's a blast to play.
Yes.
Like I'm not tired of it.
I have a feeling that's why it's going to have some lasting life to it, because it's one of those things. It reminds me of Binding of Isaac, where people, or any roguelike, not just Binding of Isaac, where you still get a lot out of the game because it's something completely different every time you play it. And that's such a great thing to hear from you as well, that it's something you wanted to play. And, I mentioned before we started recording and stuff, I'm a high school teacher, but I teach high school game design, mostly game art. And, the students are always looking, hey, what should I make? What should I do? And I'm like, what do you want to play? If you like Minecraft, go try building something like that. Build something in Minecraft, whatever you want to do. Like, it's got to be something you enjoy doing, because that's the way you're going to get the best thing out of it. Like, this is something you wanted to play. How cool is that?
Yeah, it's good advice. You mentioned it too, like for speedrunning, yes, or anything. Like, just pick something that you like and try to make something out of it. I mean, making a ROM hack is obviously not for everyone. It's a high level of understanding and skill and lots of time spent. I didn't learn how to do this from nothing. Like I did have a base right. At some point of not only programming but like assembly language programming.
Right.
And I've like gotten into ROMs before to make Game Genie codes. Just a little tiny piece of something. And that's really what this was at the end of the day. It was just lots of Game Genie codes. It's not quite right, but that kind of carries the idea of just little tiny changes here or there, figure out how to do it, and then you can snowball it into something else.
Just one or two more questions, and the first one being that we're on version 1.1. What were some of the things that you had to like? How do you go about patching release? What do you need to do as the developer of this game to update it and things like that? What needed to be done?
So the 1.1, I got that out like about a week, maybe 2 weeks ago. In and of itself was mostly just like fixing the bugs that people found. One of the major problems that some people had ran into was the Gleeok boss fight, the dragon with the multiple heads. He could get put in a room where you can't reach him with your sword. Oh. If you have the sword beams, you can. If you take a hit, you can't reach him. So that was a problem. It's rare that happens, but it happened to enough people that needed to be fixed pretty quickly. Turns out he's problematic in some other rooms too, so I took those rooms out. One of the biggest complaints I got was, why did you put P-hats into this game? Because they never land, they fly forever. Why would you do this? A lot of complaints about it. So I tweaked them. I figured out what makes them land. They roll every so many frames. They roll a random value, and if it meets a certain threshold, they'll land. I think it's like 1/8 of the time they'll land. So if you get one that doesn't seem to land for 2 or 3 minutes, you're just getting bad RNG. Is really what it is. I tweaked that number like the 3/16. Like I made it 50% more likely to land. You still get one that'll flutter around for a little bit longer, but it's not as bad. Also, one of the secret things I put in there, it's no longer secret, but I added functionality to the recorder. It does 2 extra things in this game. It makes Pole's voice die immediately, which was a nod to the Famicom Disk System version where the second controller has a microphone. If you scream or blow into it or whatever, they don't like noise, so that noise will defeat them instantly. You don't have that on the NES, but you have something in the game that makes noise, so it was kind of a nod to that.
Nice.
And then I also added the ability for the recorder to make p-hats land. So if you blow the whistle, they'll immediately jump into the state that makes them stop, slow down and stop.
Oh.
So that was something that I added. That was in 1.0, though that wasn't in the 1.1.
I didn't even try that out. In my playthrough, I should have tried that out. I didn't even try it out.
I put that in the README now in the 1.1 version. So that's actually a little side thing. That was something I put in there and I was not going to tell anybody about. And I hoped someone would figure it out.
Right.
And it took about a week. And then, someone said, hey, does this have anything to do with the p-hats? And I got so excited. I'm like, yes, you figured it out. All right. And then once that secret was out, there was really nothing else secret about it. The second quest was a secret, but people figured that out that first day.
Right. Yeah.
So all secrets are revealed with that. So back to the 1.1. The other thing that I did was I balanced the second quest. I had made a very late change to the way the second quest worked. Like I said before, it was like a series of like 6 to 8, maybe 10, somewhere around that range, different tweaks to it to make it harder. And one of the tweaks I did was I swapped the way the items are shuffled and the way the bosses are shuffled. The special items does a full shuffle. It will swap them around, as evenly as it can. The bosses are more of a light shuffle. They just kind of flip positions a few different times. So the really hard bosses at the end don't get pulled all the way to the front of the game. It could happen, but it's very rare for that to happen. Well, in the original 1.0 version of the second quest, I switched those. So I made the items more progressive. So I put like the really good stuff like toward the end, which you might not even get to. And then I made it so that some of the endgame bosses could appear really early. And the Zelda 1 runners figured out they were able to beat it. There were several people that beat second quest in the 1.0 version, and hats off. That is amazing achievement. I could not get anywhere with it. It was a very late change, and I I think maybe I went too far. For me anyway, it went too far. So I got some ideas. I did it a little differently. I put the shuffles back to where they were. Same as the first quest. What I ended up doing was I ended up removing some of the really strong items out of the item pool. So there's no red ring, there's no magical sword, there's no silver arrow. They replace them with heart containers, so you'll get more hearts. One of the other kind of effects of that is the way the item list works is that it'll do a full shuffle, but it'll make certain items progressive. So if the magical sword appeared earlier in the list than the white sword, it'll swap their positions so that you'll get the white sword first. So what tends to happen then is you basically have 2 chances for that first sword to get low enough in the list that you'll get it early. If I'm replacing it with a heart container, if I'm replacing a magical sword with a heart container, now you only really have 1 chance for that white sword to get into an earlier position. So it's more likely to be randomized in that list. Whereas in the first quest, white sword is pretty likely to appear somewhere in that first half of the 16. It could be first just as easily as it could be last in the second quest. I think that's a fine concession to make. I think it makes it makes it more random, but generally like the randomness is lower odds of you getting enough good equipment to make it through. Chances are you're not going to get the white sword and the blue ring and the wand. The wand is really powerful too. You can get those all stacked really early, but it's, you're left at the mercy of the randomness. They could just as easily be all stacked at the end, and you've got to get through all of it with a wood sword and no ring. You'll have more heart containers,
right?
Because there's more that it'll pull from. But that was a kind of a concession that I made. And I think it gives a better balance. Also, the shop prices. Right. There's a shop in the game. I don't think you've mentioned that before.
Yeah, we didn't even.
I replaced the bomb upgrade room with a shop. So the old man will sell whatever item is on the bottom of the list. He'll sell that to you, and then the price is randomly generated along the way. I made those prices scale higher in the second quest. But I did it in a different way in the 1.1 so that I wanted it to be where you could have, sometimes you get an item that's really affordable, and sometimes you run into an item that no matter how many rupees you collected, you're just not going to be able to get it. Originally, that was happening a lot more often where you couldn't afford the item. I wanted it to be kind of like 50-50-ish of like, will you be able to afford this or not? Because I think it's interesting to run into that situation of, well, I can afford this, but it's going to take all my money. Do I really need this red candle? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. I liked that idea. But it wasn't going to be any good if like the prices were like 90% of the time going to be unaffordable. That's just not fun. So I didn't want to do that.
Also gives some incentive to collect rupees. My first playthrough, I wasn't quite sure what I was collecting for until I got to a shop, and then I'm like, oh, okay, so there is a reward for collecting rupees. So
yeah, the shop was a fairly late addition too. I was answering that same question that you had. Okay, I have all these rupees. Right. The only thing you use rupees for is to fire arrows because it takes 1 rupee.
Right.
You might not even get the bow in the run. What are you going to do with all this money? So then I can make a shop. Well, how many shops are there going to be? And then I kind of came up with a way to, it's randomized as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was a kind of a, I don't know. I say stroke of genius, but it wasn't really, because if I didn't have it in there, I would have gotten 12 things. Hey, why is there not a shop in this game? And I'd been like, oh yeah, that would have made a lot of sense.
Right.
So not necessarily a stroke of genius, but
no, it
fits
great.
Idea. Yeah, it was a good idea. And if I didn't have it, it would have been in the 1.1, but I would have figured out how to put it in there if I didn't already have it in there. It was a nice addition.
Is a 1.2 needed? Is there anything else you'd like to update or patch, or and if you're not ready to share those plans, that's totally fine as well. But just curious if there is an update in the works, or if anything else is needed, because my playthrough was pretty much so far, I haven't run into any issues, might never crash or anything like that. So
I'm glad to hear that. First of all, I'm glad to hear that it's working. So development is continuing. I'm not done with it. I actually have a pretty good list of stuff that I want to put in it still. So I'm not done. I'm probably most of the way done, I guess. But I got a list of I get a lot of suggestions. Some of them are good. Some of them are not as great. Some people have misunderstood what the purpose of this game is.
Not surprised when you've reached that many people.
Asking for like, why aren't you generating complete dungeons in this?
Anytime you reach a mass amount of people, those things are bound to happen, and it just comes with the territory. So, and by the way,
the thing is,
no, go. I was just gonna say usually that's a positive thing. They enjoyed the game so much, they're like, oh, why not, do it this way or do it that way, kind of thing, right?
Yeah, I'm with you. That's what I was getting ready to say, is that I like the ideas. I want people to give me ideas.
Yeah.
As outlandish as they can be. Like, I don't care. I mean, it's up to me if I'm going to actually put them in, right? It's up to me, but I like that. I like the interactions of people. And so it's led to a few different things that I want to change. One of these is like sort of for me, but sort of for the community as well. I'm working right now on adding actual seeds to this, where you can input a value, and then other people can input their value in the game, and you can start it, and you can have races. That's essentially what I want it to come down to. Is I want to make it kind of racing eligible. I think that there's be some pretty good interest in that in watching races. I think it would get a lot of the Zelda 1 folks that like this game already might be interested in direct competition, because it doesn't really make sense when the rooms are themselves randomized every time, because one person's going to end up getting stuck with 12 rooms of pea hats and the other person's just going to fly right through with a magical sword or whatever. So it's not balanced for it right now, but so I'm definitely in the works on that right now. That has its own challenges, because one of the things about this game is that I tried to do as much as I can to prevent any kind of like condition, like soft locking or anything where you can't proceed. So some things are determined at runtime. The biggest thing is the bosses. I have a list of different checks to determine if a boss that comes up in there's this room is going to have this boss in it. Okay, well, does this boss make sense? Dig Dogger, for instance, you need the recorder to wake him up. If you don't have the recorder, I'm not going to give you Dig Dogger. I'm going to give you something else. Some of those things won't be an issue with the seating, but stuff like Dodongos will only appear if you have a certain number of bombs. There's no guarantee. Bombs are a random drop from enemies, and that's not part of the seating scripting. I don't think there's really any way to make it that way. So you're going to get situations where one player is going to get a Dodongo room and the other player is going to get something else.
Right.
I don't think there's any way to avoid that. I think that's just part of the game. You need to have a bow and arrows. You need to have enough money to fight Goma. You need bombs to fight Dodongos. I even have, depending on which door you use to enter a room, if you're entering a room from the top, I don't want any of the bosses that appear at the top of the screen there either. So Gleeok, he doesn't hurt you if you can run through his body at the top of the screen, but I don't want him to just be standing on top of him when you walk into the room. So if you take the south door into a boss room, and the boss is coming because you can hear the boss roar the room before. So the room that you decide to go in depends on whether you're going to get that boss or not as well. With the seating, you'll get the same set of doors, but you always get the door that you come in on is always added. So even though the room layout could be the same, the enemy layout could be the same, the door situation may not be the same, because you could enter the room. One can enter the room from the east and one can enter the room from the west. So the doors are slightly different. So there's going to be some divergence in there. I'm trying to think of ways I can to try to mitigate that, but I don't think it's not going to be entirely possible. But room 187 will be the same for both runners. I think the way that it should be working. So I think that's kind of cool.
That's super interesting. That's super cool.
That's definitely on the table. And the other thing I get asked about a lot is, can you put different colors in this dungeon? And so that's going to be a thing. There's 8 different dungeon palettes. I can certainly swap out palettes. I think it's going to be after every boss battle, you walk through the door, it'll change the color palette.
There you go. I like that.
I think that's fine.
Cheese Viking Games in the chat says, so we should always take the south door. Is that what you're saying?
If you don't want to fight Gleeok, take the south door. Just walk up and down.
Yeah,
you can do that.
But
the other thing is, though, if you don't have a boss, you'll get a Patra. You don't want Patra. Patra's the default boss. If the game cannot choose a boss for you, you're getting Patra, and you're getting the Patra that expands.
Yeah.
And if you come in through the top, you're going to get bopped a couple times. And there's just nothing you can do about it. I need to have some kind of filler boss in there. So Patra it is.
Having some experience with marathons and things like that, being able to seed within the the constraints of what is possible in the game, I know would make for some great races and things like that. So if it is possible, that sounds like a wonderful new wrinkle to add to the game, because that would be kind of fun. And it wouldn't be kind of fun; it would absolutely be fun. So
it's pretty close as of now. It's pretty close. And that's going to be a while before I'm ready for the next release, because I have some other stuff I want to do. But
sure.
The seeding is very close as of right now. So that will be a thing in the next version. I'm pretty excited about that.
As somebody who has tinkered around with other ROMs and things like this, has this whole process, and by the way, you don't have to be specific or commit to anything, but has this process led you to consider other ideas that haven't, that aren't, Zelda 1 Ancient Dungeon, the Legend of Zelda Ancient Dungeon? Do you want to continue to try some of these things? Is this going to be it? Just curious if there is things that you want to continue to try out and develop for.
Couple other ideas, but I'm not committing to anything.
Absolutely.
This has been a lot of fun to do. I think one of the hardest things about doing this is just getting started in the first place.
Right.
Because I had some, online documentation as far as some of the inner workings of the game. And one of the good things about Zelda 1 is there's a complete disassembly of this online. So someone has went through and basically reversed engineered and commented the entire game.
Wow.
That was a very, very valuable resource.
Wow.
They have one page and they're just dedicated to all the different variables that this game has. Wow. When you're reading it through like a debugger in the emulator, you have to figure those things. If you don't already know what they do, what this certain variable does, you have to figure it out yourself and document it yourself. Some things are pretty easy, like the number of lives you have or your score, some of those kinds of things. If you have like a visual on screen for it, like some of those things are pretty easy to figure out, but some other things are not. And so the fact that there's a complete disassembly of this game out there was a massive resource. That saved me many, many, many weeks of trying to figure stuff out on my own. Even if it was a resource that I haven't really fully embraced until the last month or so, last maybe 6 weeks, like right at the end of the 1.0 dev, I really started leaning into that disassembly. And because it was intimidating to look at first, but it has been the best resource for this. I don't think there are as many, I think like Super Mario 1 has been completely disassembled, but someone's already made an endless mode for that. So that I don't need to do that. It's already been done. It's actually been done pretty recently.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that.
First day, like the Christmas version, the retro USB Christmas cart, they do like a homebrew game like every year. And this year's one was like Endless Mario, but Mario was the Grinch. It's kind of cute.
Oh, cool.
This is really fun. Like I would like to do more of that.
Yeah.
Stuff like that, but I don't know. Maybe there's some games that lend into that, but like the documentation isn't the same for that is, I don't need to do one for, like I said, I don't need to do one for Mario 1 because it's already been disassembled and someone's already made the game. So there's no reason for me to do that. So anything else would require a lot more effort. And I think Zelda 1 lends itself really well to this kind of gameplay because you have a very diverse set of enemies. You have a very diverse set of equipment. And much of it is equipment that makes sense to have in the game. And I don't think there's too many more games that have quite that breadth and depth of stuff. Now that doesn't mean it's not possible, but maybe that's not. It's more of an intellectual challenge, perhaps, trying to figure out how to make it work, but it's also got to be a game that I enjoy playing. I really like the Zelda 1 combat.
Yes.
I think it's really well done. And like I said, there's plenty of variety in it to make it interesting. So I think that's what makes the Ancient Dungeon an interesting and fun game to play. Like I said, I have a couple ideas, but I don't know if they're going to bear fruit or not. If they do, you can bet on it being another shadow drop, though, like this one was.
Yes. Don't let us know. It's so good. I'm probably predispositioned to, like a lot of the Legend of Zelda series, Ocarina of Time, Breath of the Wild, all of the Zelda games I've just been it's probably my favorite series of games. So I think I was predispositioned probably. At the same time, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, playing through this really gave me that feel of what it was like to play Zelda kind of the first time, something I had where I just going into it, you didn't know what to expect. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about what you've created. It's so much. And literally almost every time you press the start button again, it gives you that feel because you don't know what you're going to get. And you didn't have to download. By the way, I love romhacks, but I didn't have to download another one. I didn't have to patch anything. The game, once I've done my first patch, it always works this way. And it makes it really wonderful and such a great game. Thank you for creating this thing for myself and the entire community and everything.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you enjoy it. I'm really glad.
Well, where's the if people are looking to play this, not everyone may have gone down the ROM how to patch ROMs. Where can people find this and how to go about getting it on their NES or their Mister or their emulator? Where can people find this?
Sure. So the game itself, the patch for the game, is hosted on romhacking.net. For a while, it was on the front page. It's no longer on the front page, so you'll have to go search for ROM hacks. I think there's something on the sidebar for. I don't have it up in front of me, but you should be able to find the list of the different hacks they have, and you can search for Ancient Dungeon. It should be the first thing that comes up. You'll download it. It comes as an IPS patch, so you'll need a patching program. Lunar IPS is one. Floating IPS is the one that I personally use. You can download those programs, especially if you have Windows. I think there's Mac variants of patching programs too. You need the Rev A version of the Zelda 1 ROM. Sometimes it's referred to as PRG1. They're the same. That's the version you want. You don't want the PRG0 version. That one will not work. You can patch it fine. The title screen will appear fine, and it crashes when you try to enter the dungeon. So I do get messages from people trying to patch the wrong version of the game. So make sure you have the Rev A version. And then you run your patching program. It'll ask you for the patch, and it'll ask you for the original ROM. You have to have those, and then it should spit out an output ROM. Sometimes the program will let you rename it to whatever you want. You can name it Zelda Ancient Dungeon, and then from there you can run it on emulator. You can put it on a flash cart. You can put it on your analog pocket. All that kind of stuff, and it should run on everything.
I will include links in the description as well. And it's it really, the patching process, if that seems a bit intimidating, trust me, just give it a try. It's a little tough to, you may screw it up the first time like I did. In fact, I probably screwed back in the day when I first started patching ROMs, but don't let it intimidate you, because the game is absolutely worth the squeeze for that extra few minutes of trying to figure out how to get it to work. Please do, because it's pretty great. arnpoly, I know you do a little bit of streaming. If people want to find you, or is there a place where if people want to, the times that you do stream, where people can watch you or follow you on somewhere on social media, if you prefer, where can people find you?
I can plug quite a few things.
Please.
I'm on Twitter at arnpoly, ARNPOLY. I'm arnpoly basically everywhere. I'm on Twitter. I'm on YouTube. I'm on Discord. You can find me on Discord. My Discord home is the Salsa Shack, so I'm going to give a plug to the Salsa Shack.
Great name.
We're a collection of small streamers that we get together and just do fun things. We play in fun speedrunning, a lot of NES stuff, but not necessarily NES. A lot of retro game related events. We try to do something like once a month or once a quarter. We have an event going on right now called Win Turn, because we love our puns. Play any turn-based game.
Oh,
so
cool.
That can be like an RPG. It could be like Mario Party, like a board game, a strategy game, like turn-based strategy, like just any of those. We're picking games that we like that kind of fit that mold and playing it and sharing it with each other. And we do lots of other cool stuff there. So that's the Salsa Shack Discord. One of the other things I do is I'm trying to beat every NES game.
Oh.
Project that I've been working on very, very slowly for quite a few years now, like 7 years.
Oh, wow.
I'm like about 200 games in, almost 200 games in.
Wow.
Some people have, like TMR was kind of the first one to do that, but he cranked it all out like in 3 years.
It's wild to me. That's so wild.
He worked really, really hard at it. A lot of long hours, and I don't have those kind of long hours, and a lot of those hours now are going into Ancient Dungeon. So, but I'm still working on it, even just in bits and pieces. So that's really like my main project. But one other thing I do is I write reviews of all those games that I beat from the perspective of someone who's beat the game from start to finish and what it's like. And so you can find those writings at takeontheneslibrary.com. I have that linked on my Twitter as well. So that's another project that I do.
totally slipped my mind to ask you about it, because the site has got it's got great graphics. It's a really easy layout to follow. And just seeing a take on a video game, I mean, I love reading about it. Quite often we see these things on YouTube and Twitch and stuff like that, so you don't actually get a written take or description, especially as blogging it's coming back now, but it's fallen out of style a little bit. And I'm really glad you've done write-ups on this, because it's really fun to read it through a couple of the games. I was reading through your Turtles one, and I was like, oh, this is super cool. So I'm glad you plugged it, because it's a really fun place to just find a take on a game. It's good. It's obviously you've played a bunch at this time, and I have a feeling you're going to keep at it for a while.
Yeah, like I said, it's been going slow. The writing I'm like a year behind. I think I'm writing on, I've got a Skate or Die review. I think I played that game like 17 months ago or something. So I'm way behind, but It is still ongoing. I am going to continue it. This Ancient Dungeon thing is so fun, but eventually it's going to run out. It's going to run out of stuff to put into it, and then I can finally get back to what I do there. But I said I stream on Twitch as well at arnpoly. Kind of a mix of variety of stuff. I kind of want to get back into some speedruns this year, like some actual, like, honest to goodness speedrunning, like TMNT on NES. I was trying to get sub 18 on that for a while, and I got pretty close, but didn't always record runs. So I think I want to try to pin that one down at some point this year. I would like maybe do Zelda 1 speedrunning, because I really like Zelda 1.
Yeah.
I think that might be fun to do that. So I have a couple other things in mind too, that I might like to do. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes. Like I said, I don't get much time to do it, but you can find me there, Polly.
Good luck on the grind. You're Turtles and Zelda 1. You're not picking the easiest speedrun games, but that's awesome. You're going to grind them out. So best of luck on that. That'd be awesome. I look forward to seeing some of that. I know I've already thanked you a ton for the game, and I really do. I'm going to keep playing it until I get 255. I'm not going to put the game down. Thank you so much for taking the time and staying up late and taking us through this development process. It's a fascinating process, and it sounds like it was rewarding, and I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad the community has found it and such a wonderful game. So thank you so much for your time, and thanks so much for a wonderful game. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks everyone for listening and watching. If you're enjoying the podcast, please feel free, subscribe, leave a comment, all that stuff people say at the end of a video. It honestly all goes a long way to help the podcast. Thank you so much. If you want to join us on Discord, we chat mostly about food, but occasionally we do talk about the stuff that's in the podcast. The link is in the show notes or in the description. Feel free. Come on by. Join us. If you want to follow on Twitter, Sequence Break PC. Sequence Break PC. I post when I go live. It's kind of not at a set time, so if you want to see the live feed of the podcast, feel free, follow there. And finally, if you want to email, podcast@sequencebreakpodcast.com. Sequencebreakpodcast.com is also where you can find the backlog of all of the episodes. It's also on YouTube as well, so feel free, join in, have some fun. Thank you so much. I will see ya in the next one.